Okay, so we're going to get into the knives this week. One portion of the knives we discussed briefly last week. I'll just discuss it a little bit. The other portion we'll get into a little bit. And then maybe get into the gelatin question, which is very interesting.
Which one?
Gelatin.
Gelatin.
Kosher or not?
Kosher gelatin.
So, let's see how much time we have. But just as far as the knives go, knives have an added complication in halacha. Say when it's hot, when the food's hot, or when it's cold. When it's hot, the food's hot. So the knife, what happens when it cuts, we call it has duchka de sakina. So when you press with the knife, it pushes in the food, it squeezes together, so to say. So we mentioned last week, so for example, if you're cutting the onion, we're talking about you're cutting the onion. So besides the fact that the onion is charif, the onion is sharp, so it picks up the tam. So that happens also with the dukkha, with the pushing of the knife and the cutting. So that we mentioned last week. So the tam of the knife could get into the onions, and the onions get into the knife, and according to some shitas, it gets into the whole onion. And from the whole onion, you can pick up into the knife. So you could have a milky knife, and now the onion is here by milchiks. So we discussed this a little bit. And who did if it's not an onion, if you're cutting a potato, let's say, but the potato is somewhat hot. It's not charif, it's not sharp, but it's a little bit hot. So it could be it doesn't need the same intense heat as something else would need to transfer taste. So normally you need to cook something and it has to be really hot. A klisheni, something that's a klisheni, perhaps doesn't transfer heat, doesn't transfer the taste as much. But when you're dealing with a knife and you have the pressing of a knife, so that also could get in all the way, and vice versa. So that could be an issue. Okay, we discussed a lot of that last week. I don't want to rehash all that. What I'd like to get into is cold food, because this is very common. Cold food with knives. Now the real million-dollar question is does many of the halachas that Shulchan Aruch and the Gemara actually in Shulchan Aruch refer to with knives apply today? There's something called meaty bekarka. You may have heard it. Matter of fact, I get people asking me, could I stick my knife into the ground or something? So I ask them, why do you want to stick your knife into the ground? So they have all kinds of reasons why they want to stick the knife in the ground, but none of them have to do with the halachic reason. Yeah, you know, they cooked with it. They this with that. No, it's not going to help to stick the knife in the ground. The sticking the knife in the ground came from what we have is like this: that a knife, aside from what the regular kalim have, that if it's hot, that it gets into the knives. A knife, even when it's cold, there's always shamnunis, there's always oils on the face of the knife. The knife has a knack of picking up the fats because you cut a lot with it. It's used, especially knives that may be serrated or whatever it's called that they have there. So these knives have more of a knack of getting things stuck in them, and therefore, if you want to clean it, if you want, let's say you have a knife that's used for fleishiks, and you want to use it for milchiks, so you have to get off your fats on it, if it's tray for that matter. You want to get it off. So besides, it was never used for hot, so it doesn't have to be koshered in a pot, right? Because it wasn't cooked with it. It wasn't used for hot. It wasn't used for onions. You're just using it for you cut your meat, your cold meat. You cut the chicken. You cut the fats with the knife. So. You got to get the fats off the side. So the way to do it, the Gemara says, you stick it into karka kosher, hard ground. You stick it in 3 times. You do meaty bekarka, and that roughness sort of scratches off the residue fat. Now the importance of this is because we know that the fats on the side, even if it's not a ben yoimai, even if it's not from the same day, it's still problematic. It's only blias that are inside the keli that we say if it's not from the same day that's already considered spoiled, and if you use it again, it's not going to make your food treif. But something which is on the sides, the fats that are sort of stuck onto the sides, and according to the some Rishonim, it's mashma that they're into the klipa of the side. In other words, not all the way in the knife, but it's not all the way out either. It gets into the cleaver, into the outer level peel, so to say, of the knife. And in order to get that out, you got to do meaty bekarka. So if that would be the halacha, you don't know too many people do meaty bekarka today. So your milky knives should remain milchiks, and your fleshig knives should remain fleshiks, and never should you use one for the other. Okay. So this is the halacha. This is the halacha. But many argue that today we have good ways of washing our dishes, and if you wash it clean with soap, and especially if you use one of these scrub brushes, and you scrub it and get it cleaned off with today's chemicals, it comes right off. And when you finish cleaning it, there's nothing left in the knife, and therefore it would be kosher. So that is a svara. It's actually a good svara. It's actually a good svara. You don't see that has knives. But the question is how it relates to the halacha. So some say that it's recommended not to use a knife, a milky knife, or, even if it's cold. Even though cold things you can use, doesn't matter. Cold things don't matter. But if you're going to cook milchiks, you should use a milky knife. If you're going to cook fleshiks, use a fleshik knife. You shouldn't mix the two up, because Lamaisa in the Gemara has a different way of cleaning knives, which we don't generally do, in order to make it to get it clean. But the case where practically where this would really come out is in a case where you picked up a knife to cut, let's say, your cucumbers or something, and you weren't careful to see if it was washed. In other words, if it was washed and it's already back in the drawer, you could assume that it was cleaned properly by whoever washed the dishes. But if you took it off the counter, it was used, and you took it off the counter and you cut your cucumbers or whatever you cut with it, and now you want to use that for, let's say you use a fleshig knife and you want to eat it with your milchige meal, so it's not recommended to do that, because a knife, even if it may look clean to the naked eye, but we always consider it has shamnunas, it has something on the side of the knife. So that's the halacha, and once you cut with it, you have to get it off somehow, and it's not so easy to get it off. In other words, if it's a hard, dry food, perhaps washing it well could work, but if it's something like a vegetable, then you'd have to actually peel it, because it gets in. And actually, there's certain things we're more machmer on, that you have to scrape it off. So, for example, this is very practical. You go to the fish store. Now, many times you want to buy fish, so not everybody has Sobeys around the corners, which has a kosher fish market. You go, you want to buy fish from any store. So they cut the fish with their knives, and they whatever they do. So the question is, could I do that? I'm buying kosher fish. I see it has skins, has fins and scales on it. I see clearly it's a salmon. It's kosher. There's no question about the fish, what it is. I'm watching the guy the whole time. So, but he's going to use a knife that he's using for the fish. It's cold. It's not hot. It's cold, but it gets the fat of the fish on it. So, in the old days, we used to bring our own knife. You buy a fish knife. That's what we used to do. We used to buy a fish knife and give it to the guy and say, I want that salmon over there, but cut it with this knife. The guy would curse or whatever, string of curses, and then do it. He didn't like the knife. It wasn't as sharp and good as his knife, So, but I know, like down south in the Fatinos over there, they used to have two knives there, one kosher knife, one not kosher knife. So, you tell them kosher, so we take the kosher knife. But the question is, there's no mashgiach there. How do you know it's kosher, not kosher? How do you trust the guy? So the question is could you do it? So if he's you have to make sure to use a knife that's kosher. But if, let's say, you can't, so or he already cut it, he came home, he cut the fish, what could I do? So what you do is you take a knife and you scrape it. You have to scrape down all the edges that were scraped with the knife against all the edges, to scrape down all the all the areas that were cut. To scrape it, sort of takes off whatever came on from the not kosher knife. That's how you would proceed with that. The question is, could you do it lechatchila or not? Some say, well, it's better not to lechatchila. Others say, well, if you don't have a choice and you're in such a situation, that's the only way to purchase fish, then you could actually do that lechatchila and scrape off the sides. That's the question.
One of the
what?
Is there a concern with the knife you use to scrape?
The knife that you use.
The knife gets stuff on.
Yeah, you would have to wash it well then.
Yeah.
You have to wash it well afterwards, right?
One of
And you wash it. After you scrape, you wash it.
the prominent Ravs in our neighborhood, his wife told me many years ago what she does is she'll go in like a 1/4 inch with her knife
and cut it off.
And she cuts it off on both sides.
But there you lose half your fish.
Mm-hmm.
All
I'm doing is repeating what she she told me she did.
Yeah.
That was her.
Yeah. So that'll be an issue. Taking out the cavity of the fish, all that, I don't know if that really takes cutting, but any part where they have to actually cut, they would have to be
taken out. Huh?
Yeah. So that's the deal with the knives. Agav, buying fish, one has to be careful when you buy fish. The halacha is, it's one of the mitzvahs I say is to see that it's kosher. So, whereas you may think it's kosher, and it may have a big sign that says, white fish or whatever it says on it, which happens to be kosher, but you actually have to see the scales. You have to see that the fish has scales. It's not enough to just buy the fish. There's a question on the salmon fish, if it could be imitated or not. If it's a simon muvik, the color pink, maybe it's a simon muvik on the fish. If it's wrapped and has a hechsher on it, it's different. It's already wrapped with a hechsher, but when you buy lox, it's already wrapped and it has a hechsher.
One of the interesting things is they've given a name, bassa. I don't know if you're familiar with that. You ever see the fish bassa advertised?
Bass.
Bassa. What it is, it's catfish.
Oh yeah?
Except it
What does it look like?
white, nice,
White.
fillet. It's beautiful, but if you don't know it's catfish,
You know those catfish, you don't eat it, yeah.
well, it's sold as a
Right, so basically you have to check to see that the scales are on it whenever you buy fish.
What is the scales off? If they take
It's on the skin, so if you get skinned already fish, whatever it's called.
fillet. Yeah, fillet.
Yeah, but if it doesn't have a skin on it, so you can't buy it unless you
really?
see the guy cutting it off. Or they only have kosher fish there. If they only have kosher fish there and there's a mashgiach that knows there's only kosher fish, you're okay. If you go to a store that only sells kosher fish, they used to have that. They only sell kosher fish, even if there's no mashgiach there.
There's no problem.
But you can rely enough for the knife. Usually, if you know there's only kosher fish there, that for the knife, that's good enough. For the fish itself, you should make sure you see the scales. How do you know it's kosher? Mashgiach. For the knife, it could be that would be enough. Sometimes, even in these places where they only sell kosher in the front, in the back they have non-kosher. So you have to just be aware of that. But in any case, you have to make sure you see the scales, because without seeing that, then you can't rely it's kosher. And this was a big shiloh in the old days, the sardines, the chuvas, and the paiskim about sardines. That, how do you know there's old sardines in there? You know? So it's okay. Today we have good kashrus organizations and everything comes with a hechsher, fine and dandy. But in the old days, where the kashrus wasn't so, it wasn't so up to date, so they didn't have such grand, kashrus all over the world by all this. And so you went to place and people used to buy sardines. People used to, one of the shuvas they write, people used to eat sardines every Shabbos and Yom Tov and anything because they couldn't buy kosher food. So they just bought sardines. But the question was, were they allowed to rely on it? Because there was a question about the oils they put in there, and then there was another question that for all the fish is taka sardines. You get more fish together. They have the tuna fish cans that say a dolphin free, dolphin free. Yeah, these tunas come and they vacuum them up with a big vacuum from the sea, and they suck them in, and they come in by the whole. So if there's any other fish, dolphins, tunas are big fish. If you have any other fish floating around there, they get sucked up. So in the old days, there was no chashash. A big fish, you catch them one by one. Well, you're not going to take a dolphin home. But today they come and they can come onto the boat, and at that point they get skinned and cut and everything. So that's why some organizations are machbet have a mashgiach on the boat. So some people say it doesn't help on the boat. They can't really see what they're doing over there. It's very hard to tell, mass production, what's going on. But in any case, they try to be very careful to get out that issue, have a mashgiach there to remove it. But these are issues that come up with buying fish. Okay, we'd like to go into today a little bit is the question of gelatin. What's the question of gelatin? It happens to be a very fascinating shaila and shuvas around on it. These things are made from, either they were made from the ore of the animal, from the hide of the animal. They extracted whatever they extracted from it, and they made gelatin out of it. Or it was made from the bones sometimes, but it's made from these parts of the animals. And while it's a gelatin question, but you have all kinds of ingredients today that you shouldn't know that they exist in the food you're eating. But they take stuff from beetles. They take Coca-Cola used to take, I think, from the beetles to get the black color. And they get all kinds of things from different Gemara. So you get there's the place can talk about. They talk about you have red color they would get from a certain talashani, right? The Gemara says red worm, right? They used to use, so they would actually get the red color that they would put into certain foods from worms that were dried up. So obviously these are not kosher food, and the question is, and it's in the food you're eating. So the question is it kosher? And why would it be kosher? So the shaila comes like this. The shaila is really twofold. We'll start from the first part. So the first question is, assuming the food's coming from assuming these things are coming from the bones, and it's coming from the skins of the animal, are the skins and bones of the animal not kosher? Maybe they are kosher. In other words, the Torah says you can't eat a chazer. Okay, or you can't eat a nevela, an animal that dies if it's not shechted properly, or you can't eat treifa, So does that apply just to the meat, or does that apply to the bones, the non-edible parts of the animal also? Are the non-edible parts of the animal also not kosher? That's the question. So the Rambam's lashon is like this: Ha'oichel min nevelo treifa or min behema. So you ate from an avela treifa or from a behema chaya tameim, not kosher animal. Or from the skin, or from the bones, from the sinews, from the horns, whatever. Has raised that potter. So even though it's aser, the Rambam says it's potter. In other words, those parts you're not chayiv. You won't get malchus for eating it. Because it's not really edible, but nonetheless, Rambam says it's aser.
It's also to make gelatin from this, yeah?
So it's aser to eat it.
Let's eat it.
It's aser to eat it. Now the question is, why is it aser to eat? That's the question. Why is it aser to eat? So there's a big discussion over here. The Baron has a tshuva. The Baron Kotler has a big tshuva on this, on the gelatin, and really the question is, why? First, let's go. Why are you not chayiv for eating it? Are you not chayiv for eating it? If you're saying that it's part of the not kosher animals, part of the veil treifa, so why are you not chayiv to eat it? So are you not chayiv to eat it because there's a meat? As the pasuk says, "Mibsarim lo'isachel." Don't eat from the meat, but not from the bones. The bones you could eat. So the pasuk seems to say, the drasha seems to say, the whole isser is on the meat, not on the other parts. So that would seem to say that really the other parts of the animal is really not a problem of not kosher. So why does the Rambam say it's aser? Perhaps it's only aser midrabanan. Perhaps it's only aser midrabanan, but midaraisa it would be mutter. Or really it is not kosher, and it's aser min Torah. Just since it's not something which you eat. So anything which you eat shaloi kaderech is shaloi kaderech achila. Anything which is not really edible and you eat it is not called a proper maisa achila. So you can't get malchus because you didn't eat it properly. It would have the same status as eating like a chasi shir.
Is that? Will we also be including kosher animals that were not shechted?
Yeah, that's an avela. Kosher animal weren't shechted. If you go to a non-Jewish store and buy meat, that meat's an avela. The status of an avela, because it wasn't shechted.
Right, but, so
However,
we're
they
talking-
killed it. It wasn't through shechita, so that's din of an avela. So those the same thing from there. Yeah. So that's the question.
Today, but today is a derech achila. Today it is a derech achila to make gel and eat it.
So what they do is, so that would be the nafkamina. Nafkamina would be, if be'etzem it's kosher, it's not part of the isser, so maybe it's rabbanan, maybe perhaps, but it's be'etzem kosher, so then, now that I made it edible, who cares? I took a kosher product and I made it edible. But if really it's not kosher, but the whole heter midaraisa, in other words, you're not going to get malchus for eating it, is because it's not edible. But if I make it edible, perhaps it should be back usher. It should be regular derech achil. It should be usher.
So if I took the trafe, like a trafe fish, part of it, and made gelatin, not the non-edible, that's okay?
Right. Well, that's what we're discussing here. That's the
Yeah.
discussion. That would depend on these two things. So, there's another factor here. So what's the isser? In other words, okay, so that it could be perhaps another reason why it should be mutter. Another reason it should be mutter, we'll discuss more, is that something which, even let's say it's because it's not edible, that's why it's mutter. Torah only asks if something's edible, so if you eat it, at least you're not going to get malchus on it if you eat it, if it's not edible. And now I make it edible. So the question is, now it should become asr. Perhaps once the isser was sort of paka, the isser sort of fell off, even though it should have been included in the isser, but for whatever reason the isser fell off, maybe it can't come back on. So that would be an argument. Is yeah, that would be an argument. It was never chal on this, so maybe it shouldn't come back on. So that's also part of the question. At the end of the day,
I have a recipe for fish lip gelatin. For real.
This fish is-
No, they take the lips to make gelatin. I thought it was so interesting, I wrote it down.
Byron wants to say, even if you want to say that that it technically should be mutter, but the Rambam says it's asur, even though you don't get malchus, it's asur. So where did that isur come from? So we want to say it's isur yotzei. It's isur yotzei min hatamei. In other words, anything that comes out of it, we say anything comes out of a tummy animal is considered asur, even if it's not the etzem animal itself. It's not the meat. Something comes out of an isur is asur. We have this. That's why milk would have been asur. That's why milk is asur. The milk of a not kosher animal is asur, even though it's not a chazer. Why can I eat the milk? Because it's yotzei min hatamei. Anything comes out of a not tummy animal is asur. So perhaps this is asur al yotzei min hatamei, and it would also be asur.
And honey, where it's not considered yotzei.
Honey is not considered yotzei because it swallows stuff and then it sets it out. Gemara has a discussion because it swallows things and sets it out, or maybe it's a pasuk. It's a pasuk that's matter it, but it doesn't. It's not secreted from the animal itself. It's rather from food that it eats and digests.
But the milk is coming out of a cow that hasn't been shafted.
It's
So
also also to eat. Yotzei, it's also yotzei min ha'isur. It's a cow that hasn't been shechted. It's even min ha'chai.
milk, though.
Oh, you mean regular milk that comes
Yeah.
out? Regular from a kosher cow. So the Gemara says, because there's a pasuk, cholav, you're letting cholav. Without the pasuk, it would have been asur. But there's a pasuk that's matir it. And you want to see how far this goes? There's something called nesyuve chalva. In other words, if you ever, most of us don't make cheese today in our own house, but in the old days, a lot of people make cheese. And sometimes you'll take, let's say, a cheese, and you let it sit a while, and you get some film on top, So it settles, and the harder parts go down. They take a yogurt sometimes. They have the water sort of that goes to the top. So by making cheese process, that's what happens. You separate the parts of the cheese, and it gets curdles, it gets hard, and the water of it goes up. That's called nesuve chalva. That's called the water of the milk. Now, if you take that and do it again, that's called mei chalav, and then you can make mei chalav. Mei chalav is if you do it again. You split that again, and you get the water from that. So this whole question is that milchix. What is that exactly? Is that milchix? Is it milk? Is it water? But that's called mei chalav. Now there's a shita in the Rishonim that holds, the Shach brings it down in Shulchan Aruch, that you're not allowed to eat it. It's ever min achai, because really milk should have been also al ever min achai, but the Torah was matter to drink milk. It says it was chalav v'dvash. You could eat milk. So it's always chalav v'dvash. It's Torah says you could eat milk, but that's only milk. But the mei chalav, the water of the water which we extract the milk from totally, that would be usher to eat. Als even min achai. There's one sheet that brought down in the Shach. Hey, like that.
But it's already
It's already in the milk. It's out of milk. It's a good question, but that's I'm just bringing this out. So really, milk would have been usher als yotzei min achai, and the only reason it's mutter because the pasuk was matter it.
And we know that pasuk only applies to kosher animals.
Yeah, because you're only allowed to eat milk from a kosher animal. That's correct. Yeah.
That pasuk doesn't override.
It doesn't override it, right? Right. Only as they say from the chai, but it doesn't override the not kosher animal. So yotzei min atami is tummy. So he says perhaps the issue of this is yotzei min atami is tummy. So Byron goes through a whole tshuva on it, and he comes out that it's awesome. On the other hand, the Nocturne here in the Tzitz Eliezer, Chelak Daled, he brings a tshuva from Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky. Cheskel Abramsky on gelatin. So he writes here, he comes out, he actually writes, that it's mutter. He brings 3 rayas that he holds that it should be mutter. But the basis of his heter is that no, that somebody said the or never was b'chlal the Isser, was never part of the Isser. He doesn't really deal with the Rambam so much, but I saw that the Rambam says Asr, but I saw Rav Yosef brings down the B'yayim, brings down that it's Mefurish in the Rashba and other Rishonim that it's mutter. So even though the Rambam seems to say that somebody has some kind of issue on it, whether it's the Rais or the Rabbanon, but the Rashba, he says, seems to hold that it's mutter, and over here we pass it like the Rashba. I don't know why we pass it like the Rashba. That's what he says. But he also brings down here that that the etzem should be mutter. But in the beginning, he brings down a svara here. He says, there's a question over here, and it brings down to explain this question. We know there's something called when you take an isser and you change it. Okay, for example, it says like this. It's based on the B'yayim on the Rosh that says chiddush that chaticha shel isser falls into. It says that if a piece of isser falls into honey. So the honey, the honey has the ability to change it over, to take it and totally break down the isser, and chemically change the what the isser is. So if you have a little piece of chazer or something falling into the honey, and it sits there for I don't know how long, it actually breaks apart and comes apart, and it becomes mutter l'achila, becomes mutter to eat. The Yashav says that's why
The
chazer.
Really?
Yeah. The Yashav says that's why a Torah is compared to dvash, because if you take yourself and put yourself in the Torah, you could change yourself. You could change yourself over. That's the. But as I said, dvash enough by ishter, so the ishter is nimuach into the dvash. It gets dissolved into the honey.
So you're talking it's dissolved.
It's dissolved. Yeah, I guess if you still see the whole piece there, then maybe that wouldn't apply. But it's dissolved in. and it changes over. We don't have, there's not have to bottle bashishim. It changes over to heter, and he uses that to matter the musk that comes from chaya, right? That comes from a certain chaya that has chatoitres b'tzavara, and it gets some red splotches filled out like blood that comes on its neck, and they make musk out of it. So even though it starts off being dam, he says we don't care about that because it's just pir shebiyalma, changes over, sort of dissolves and turns into something else. And bosh tahasvels even didn't need the dvash. So that's the rush for Rabbeinu Yoina, and they use this for Rabbeinu Yoina. All the poskim use this for Rabbeinu Yoina a lot, when they want to be mata certain things that had a chemical change. In other words, something that started off as isser, started off as dam, and then it sort of changed to something else. We have a Gemara says dam necher v'nasacholov, the milk of a woman comes from dam. Dam changes and ends up being milk. Dam nechel v'nachol, and chol is actually kosher. Chol v'isha is actually kosher. So dam nechel v'nasacholov, we see if something undergoes a change. It could be it loses its isser. So it says the same thing over here. There's the dam of the animal goes through some kind of change. It dries up, it disintegrates, and comes to pir shebiyalma, and therefore it should be mutter. So the question is how far you take that. The Rambam says that the mor is also a certain type of spice, was made from a tzrar in a chaya shebahoidu, a certain chaya in India. And the Ravid has a question on it, and it really brings down this whole shock of Italian. And the Ravid has a question on it. They use that for the Mishkan. They use it for the base of Mikvah. They use it for the spices that go into the Ketores. So
does it make a difference that the Ketores is not it?
yeah. So it says like this. So the Rambam says. Let's read it for you here. Let's find it in a second. Write it down. Hamor hutztam atzror chamchai shebahoidu. So the Ravid says, "Ein daiti noicha, ein daiti mekabelas that they should take into the Beis Hamikdash dam chaya. The koshchein dam chaya tameya. They should use it as part of the Beis Hamikdash dam of the chaya tameya." So that's the question. So the Kesef Mishnah says, well, to answer the Rambam, that no, that you have to say it was the same concept, that it was nishtan of the dam changed, it became nothing, and then nasa kofa b'yalma. So now it's sort of like kosher. That's what he says. Now, Yehuda has a big question. His son wrote this tshuva. He has a big question because they use other not kosher animals. They use talashani. Right, they got the red dye from the talashani, and they used it in the Mishkan for the chayshin, the ephod. So he goes through a whole tshuva about that. But nonetheless, the Rambam in the Kesef Mishnah seems to say the svara also that something which started off as being dam and sort of disintegrated, and now is something else. So it loses its old isser and it becomes mutter. So the question is, when do you say this? So Chazkel Abramsky says, well, perhaps you could use the svara for gelatin. In other words, even though, let's say atzamas were also to eat. Let's say go like the Rambam that it's also to eat. But you're not eating the bone as is. You're not eating the bones in the cholent. You're they're chemically pulling out different parts and making the gelatin out of it. So he says, no, you can't say that. It's Einu Yetziva Chadasha. This is not a new thing that's happening. Shenashtanim Yechoyma Rishon. That changed from the initial thing to a new, it became a new chaymer. That's not what happened. He says the gelatin no oisa chaymer atzma sheyeshtu b'atzamis beikran. You're just taking out. I don't know what they take out from there, but certain parts. And mecholam tzama kimim everything else they use is just to remove the other parts. So in other words, they just remove the other parts of the bone and they leave that gelatin and they just take the gelatin. but it's not shot that it underwent some chemical change.
So it's an extract rather
So it's
than
just right. It's an extract rather than than something
Transformation.
which disintegrated and is coming back to life. Something which disintegrated is coming back to life. We could argue is a new thing, but something which just an extract it won't have this heter. That's what he says, and the Tzitz Eliezer himself questions this. He questions this if it's. If that's the case, but there's another angle over here. So that wouldn't be enough. He holds that wouldn't be enough to be matur. That wouldn't be enough to be matur. He's matur because he holds that tzomis amutter, the bones are mutter. But that would be subject to the machlokes, maybe the Rambam and the Rashba, whether bones of an animal are mutter or aser. So that would be the question. But he brings down here in the Yabi Omer. He brings down that so Gemara says like the Ramah brings down Shulchan Aruch like this. The Ora Keva, they used to store the cheese, right? Cheese used to come in the stomach of the animal. The Ora Keva, that's where they made the cheese. They used the enzymes of the rennet. They used it. So that was from the enzymes of the stomach of the animal. They left it in there, and that's how cheese was made. So there's a whole similar Shulchan Aruch. How do you do that? It's basa b'chalav, right? You have the basa b'chalav. So okay, so that's the Shulchan Aruch. So there, you say that it's bottled. It's bottled b'shishim. If you have 60 times as much, it doesn't give tam. But there's a problem that it's maimid, something which creates it as a maimid. There's a problem. So the problem with basa b'chalav, you have to have. It has to be cooked. Derech bishul asatayus. You have to have shishim. If you don't have if you have 60 times as much, there's no issue. But if you're using a keva of an avela or a treifa, using the stomach of the animal that's not kosher, it's an avela or treifa, wasn't shechted.
Do they use the stomach or the lining, like scraping of the lining?
Well, they actually used to use the stomach, and then they used the line, the scraping of the line.
So they would use the actual.
But either, yeah. So they say like this: al basa b'chalav is not an issue because if you don't have 60 times, it's not considered enough chalav in there to be considered basa b'chalav. But when you talk about a treifa animal, if you're using the stomach of a treifa animal, it's worse because there you don't need 60. Because since it's already not kosher, you see chalav is kosher and basa is kosher. So if you don't have a certain amount, it's not going to be considered basa b'chalav. But when you're using a not kosher animal, so there, something which is treif, if you put into the food, it serves a purpose of, creates the cheese, even though you don't taste it anymore because it's less than 60, but the cheese is sort of made out of this enzyme, that's called a davar hamaimid, and that's not bottled. So therefore, if you use a kevas nevela, you got a problem. So the Ramah says like this. Ramah says, the reason why you could do it is if it's eitz ba'alma, if it's R and it's hard, it's only like a wood. It's a wood, so it's not considered treif. So eitz ba'alma, it's not considered treif. So Rabbi Yehuda learns this Ramah only helps by basa b'chalav issues, but it doesn't help for. It only works for basa b'chalav, but doesn't work for nevela. So Rabbi Yehuda says for nevela wouldn't help even if it's hard. But the other poskim seems to be matir, even if it's for nevela. Once it's hard, once it becomes hard and it's not edible, we don't consider it's nisyavish. It dries up. We don't consider it an oichel at all. We don't consider it a food. Therefore, it doesn't have a problem of being not kosher. And therefore, wouldn't make your cheese not kosher. What?
It's alive. It's a living chemical. So, like you're not eating the rennet. You're not putting it in to eat the rennet. You're putting it in so you transform the milk. You change the milk into cheese. You're not eating the rennet for the rennet's sake. I mean, it's an enzyme. It changes what it acts on something to change it, but it doesn't change itself.
And the portion of it.
Huh?
Would be a minute portion compared to the.
So I'm not sure. It seems like he's more worried that it's coming from the or, it's coming from the skin of the animal, and that skin is not kosher.
Mm-hmm.
But if that skin is hard, it's dried up, so then he's not. Then the Rama is saying we don't have to be concerned with that.
So once it becomes non-edible.
Right. Yav should I say?
Clear as
Afterwards,
mud.
you put the cholov in afterwards. Even if you salt it and maliach is karoisech, but since it's dried up, so there wouldn't be a problem. So this would be a very big makam lahater. He brings down also from Rashu's first Svi over here, the red worms, okay, that they would dry up. They would dry up these red worms, and they would become like dust or something. And then they would use that dust to redden the wine, or the schnapps to make it look red, yain sarf, to make it look red.
Tequila.
Yeah. And even though they're putting that in, it would be kosher. It would be considered kosher because it's not treif, because it's dried up. It loses its tayrus eichel on it, and it's considered dried up. The Noid Yehuda had a similar type of thing where where is it here? Shlafucha shel dog tamei. They used to also put certain extracts of a not kosher fish, and they would dry it up, also and make it I don't know what they did exactly with it. And they would put it into the wine barrels, or into the made devash, different other med or whatever they put in order to hold down the shmarim, to hold down the pieces on the bottom. I guess they took like the skin of a not kosher fish. They do that?
Yeah.
What do they do?
They take the blood extracts in some of the French wines, blood extract that
No, he's talking something different.
Well, what is that? What is that? What is
to,
that?
what does it do? It's,
Settle?
yeah, not just to settle, but it combines with it and causes
With the
Well, it
tannins?
says- Yeah.
Huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
With the tannins.
Yeah. So, and it's used, so is that a problem? Is that a problem? They're using the not kosher fish to do that. And the question is that an issue with kashrus? Now I'm going to drink the wine. So Yehuda, based on, actually asks it, but other parts can here come out that no, that once it's dried up, it loses its Torah's issur on it, and now that it's used, so it could be mutter. So what?
To clarify the one,
Yeah, to clarify the wine. Yeah,
What is
you
elm?
never know what's going on with your
Freaking
foods.
alum.
Yeah, what is elm? Is that fish extract?
I don't think so. I think it comes from a plant.
Is it? No, I didn't remember elm. You put it in and it
The water.
grabs whatever the particles and they'll fall
Puts it
down.
down.
Similar.
So, Bekitzer, in a nutshell here, so Radia said he's very ma'archadet. He also comes out to be moderate based on this svara. Halacha l'mais is not so simple because these cases that these poskim are talking about, you're not actually eating the food because you want to eat the food. You're drinking the wine. There may have some residue of this, whatever you call it, or you're coloring the mashka, but you just want to drink the wine, the mashka, and it's just put in as coloring. But something which you put in because to make the food edible, because you want to eat the thing itself. So there's always a question of achshavei. In other words, when I eat it, so it may have lost its tayrus eichel because it became hard. If you go like those poskim that lose its tayrus food, but when I swallow it and eat it, perhaps I'm making it back into a food because I'm eating it. So by me eating it, like we find the Rosh says by Pesach, chametz on Pesach, he says that if it's nifsal, if it's charcha, if you burnt it, so it's not right for eating. But then you go ahead and eat it, it may actually be usher to eat because by eating it, you're making it back into a food. This is my lunch today. This is my food. So you actually back to a food, so it'll be usher. So all these cases, you don't really want to eat that's just for a side reason it's there. But the real food you want to eat is something else. But if you actually want to eat that food itself, the question is, why is the gelatin put into the food? If it's put in there as part of the ingredients of the food itself, so the question is, there could be there's an achshavei when I'm eating it, I'm making it back into a food, and that would be a problem. So just to recap, because it's very, yeah.
But what about medicines? Like
Oh,
Yeah.
Gelatin caps.
so this is where I'm getting to. So just to recap, so one of the svaras to be matter and one of the svaras to aser, and we'll see it makes a lot of nafkaminas halacha. The svaras to aser is if you hold like the Rambam that some are aser. And you say to extract, you're just extracting it, you're not changing chemical change of it, so that's also remains aser. And then when you're eating it, perhaps it's still aser. Perhaps the Raisa, perhaps the Rabbanan that's aser, but the Rambam says that it's aser. And actually, Rav Moshe in the Tshuva, by the way, Moshe Feinstein in the Tshuva mentions this. I don't know where the Tshuva is. See if I can find it now. But he gelatin. Here we are. He asks it actually. He asks it over there. The Tshuva on it. He asks it. He says perhaps it's only Asim Rabbanon, perhaps it's Asim Deraisa, but he says Yesh Lasa Tisui Ika Ba'ayis Vatzamis Ukadaima, even though you're potter like the Rambam says. So he says he holds the gelatin as Asim. This is what Moshe Feinstein. So he says it's actually Asim. And so that will be smart to say it's awesome. Those that are matir base it on two things. Perhaps that tzomis are not really awesome. Maybe go like the Rashba, the other rice, or Shulchan Aruch, maybe holds that the bones and the things are awesome. But that would only work for things that are made out of unedible items. But if you have something made of, let's say, talas, made out of the worms, or things that are coming from edible things, you won't have that heter. Okay? And so another side of the hatter is maybe if it dries up, and the Chaim Moshe is also mattered, by the way, gelatin based on this, that it's dried up, it loses its Torah sisser. If it dries up, you make a powder out of it, it's not an oichel anymore, it loses its Torah sisser. And then the question is, do you have an achshaveh when I go ahead and eat it afterwards? That's the question. So really would depend on what purpose is it serving in my food. What's the purpose it's serving in the food? Now I want to just point out one side point here. There's a whole question, Pesach, we're learning, right, of kitnius shenashtana. We have, they do make a chemical change to a lot of the food, so there's a big machlokes in the Chsherim, whether today the poskim don't decide whether you eat it or not, the kashrus organizations decide. If they write it's kosher, eat it. If they write it's not kosher, not eat it. So there's a machlokes in the kashrus organizations whether kitnius shenashtana is mutter. So in other words, we don't eat kitnias, so corn. We don't eat corn. So they extract from corn different things and they change it, and it gets into your food. So the question is, it's not in the original form, is it mutter or asr? So a lot of the question is based on this. And what it's based on is, those that say it's mutter say it's like this musk and all these things that had a change, and it's not the original item. Those that are asr say no, it's not a dimion, because it has to be something which loses its Torah's oichel totally. In other words, it has to become a dust, it has to become a hard powder which is not edible, and then if you change it back into something else, you could say it was nishtana changed. But something which just changed over will always remain the food. It never became a dust, it never became ka'etz, yavish ka'etz, it never became something which is not edible, so it never lost its isser. It had to first lose its isser by becoming unedible, totally becoming a thing, and then you make it back into something, then you can argue that it has a din of nishtana. But most of the chemical process that goes on doesn't have that, and therefore you wouldn't have the heter. So that's actually a question over here also. So in other words, if the gelatin is made such a way where it's taka dried up, and it's made, I don't know how it's made today, but it's made as taka dried up, so that would be a svara to say that it became mutter, and once it's mutter, then perhaps it will be mutter even afterwards. Now the only question is, when I eat it, am I achshaveh? So getting back to the medicine, there's a big svara to say the medicine, the capsules for sure, but even in the hard tablets or something, if you have not kosher parts in there, so that's not really lachila. It's hard. It's not something which is really lachila b'etzem. Just the question is, why am I eating it? So I'm really only eating it for the medicine. I'm not eating it for the food part. So there's a svara to say, the poskim say that's not called achshaveh. I'm not trying to make it. That's like putting in the color to the wine or putting in the thing to make this thing settle. But I'm not using it to eat. If it's put into the thing to make it edible, a lot of times it's put into the food to make it edible. Glycerin and these things is put in to give it. A person should be able to eat it.
But you're not eating it anyway. So it's not really ochel. You're just swallowing it.
Swallowing is oichel, but the reason why it's not called eating is because it's not something which is hard, and yavish ka'etz is not called derech achila. So you're eating it, but shaloi kederech achila. That's how we look at it. Swallowing it, but it's not called derech achila because it's not something which is normally eaten properly like that. So that's that. The heter of the medicine is you're eating a shaloi kederech achila, A, and B, it's hard already, and it's something which is not put there to make it edible. It's put there just to somehow hold everything together and to make a concoction. But really, what you want to get is the medicine part. So that would be the heter. But something which is soft and actually chewable and tastes good, then you have a real problem. We'll get into this machlokes. Is the gelatin in there? Is that kosher or not?
Like a gel cap.
A gel cap, so
But
a
it
gel.
doesn't have the taste. Or you don't take
Yeah.
it for the taste.
So a gel cap, you have to really just figure out how bitter it is, how edible it is or not. If it's considered edible, it's worse. It's always better not the gel cap than the gel caps. The gel could be somewhat edible. You have to chew it and taste it and see how bitter. If it's really bitter,
The reason you have the gel
really bitter,
cap
then it's
is so you can swallow it without having any taste.
yeah.
It's just masking it's the
taste of it.
packaging of the medication.
Yeah. So you have to know, Iriv Davar Mar, if you put in something very bitter in there, that has a din of Shaloi Kaderech Achila. But again, it's only Shaloi Kaderech Achila, which perhaps is Asam Midrabanan. The heter we're trying to have here is that it's not kosher at all. The ingredients in there are not kosher because they're hard. That you wouldn't have, maybe you would have. You have to know. But if it's just could be still called Shaloi Kaderech Achila because it's hard. So that's the question that gets involved.
The same with vitamins?
Same thing with vitamins. Vitamins are the same thing. It could be that it's not edible. Now I don't know what they put in there in the vitamins, but the gelatin is the same question. Maybe they have ingredients there that are edible. So just in there. I don't know what's in there. Maybe they put things. I don't know what they put in there.
I saw someone would suggested that you wrap the gel cut in a tissue and swallow it that way, but I never understood how that
How you do it? I never understood how you eat that. I never tried it.
No, I'm saying I don't understand the suggestion of what...
It's not called derech achila. It's not called the way of eating it then. That would be the heter. Interesting enough, I saw glycerin. Glycerin, I think, is a real oichel. It's an oichel. It doesn't have the heter of gelatin. Glycerin. Because you have to know it comes from animal fats, if it comes from vegetables, if it comes from So depending where it comes from.
Doesn't matter if it's edible by itself, because I've never seen anybody eat glycerin by itself. It may be combined with something else.
But it's considered an oichel. Normally you wouldn't eat it because it doesn't have a taste. It doesn't taste much. But Moshe writes it's not nice and tam. It doesn't have a taste. It could be it's bottled. So that would be a swear that it's bottled. But the question is how much they put in and how much glycerin there. That needs a little more. I asked someone from the COR to get back to me with more information on that. I don't know how that works. But the question is how much is put in there and what it is. But generally we try to avoid non-kosher glycerin. It's kosher glycerin, non-kosher glycerin that we try to avoid because that is an oichel. As far as gelatin is subject to this machlokes, and especially if it's a hard cap, there you wouldn't have the issues. Okay.